In this video, we're going to paint the inside of the cloak. In the last episode, we painted the outside, the red. This is the stage you should be at. Now, before I begin, I want to emphasize that this one's purely optional and only if you want to do it. And most people are never going to see any of the work you're about to do, but it is good practice. And because no one's ever going to see it, it doesn't matter if you muck it up. Separate your miniature out because we only need this part. With that done, we're going to use 3 paints today. Celestra Grey, Ulfon Grey, and our whiting. I promise I'm going to use it this time. All we're going to need is our roughing out brush. Make sure you thoroughly mix your Celestra Grey and add some to the palette. Use water to thin it down. Remember, your base paints are quite thick and gloopy. Use enough water, and thoroughly mix it in. Make sure it's all those little splodges nice and even. Just to test the consistency. So I'm going to use the back of the thumbnail. Yeah, some good coverage there. And it's flowing nicely off the end of the brush. Right. I'm going to start with the edges of the cloak where it meets the red. And then I'm going to paint inwards. This is very similar to how painters and decorators did cutting in. So, as you've seen with most of my painting techniques, what I'm going to rely on is placing the point of the brush down or the side of the brush down, then using one long continuous stroke. And this will give me the best performance out of my paint and my paintbrush. So, get it in there, right up close. That's about right. There, one stroke. And then you should be able to see that's a nice, neat join between red and off-white. I'm going to try and do that the other side too. And then place, then drag one continuous movement. So that's not too bad. I think there's a little bit toward the end of the cloak, which I can do again. Yes, that's it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply one thin coat all over, dry it, and repeat that 2 to 3 times to get the necessary coverage. After that first coat, we can see something odd's happened. The paint was applied to these areas that are now black, and it's slid straight off. There's a couple of things that can cause this. It can be the consistency of the paint, and it can be that there's a slight amount of grease or other contaminant on the surface area of the miniature. Neither are particularly easy to deal with. You just sort of have to test and adjust. So I was going to wick away some of the moisture out of my bristles. That'll mean there's more pigment and medium in there. And you see if that makes any difference. Hopefully this second coat should cover that up nicely. Let's give it a go. That's my second coat of grey applied. So you can see I haven't given this area a second coat. This area does. And we can see how much more opaque that grey is and how much patchier this is. Bearing in mind, from the previous one, we saw that the paint hadn't applied properly and slid off. And now it's stuck on there nicely. Now I think that was actually the matte black paint I used. Was actually quite satiny. I think that probably it was just a little bit too smooth and the paint couldn't quite stick to it. So I'm going to bear that in mind for the rest of this miniature when I'm painting. But this should be the only area of black we're painting. I don't see it affecting anything else. Let's try a third coat now. Just get that opacity even higher. That's the third coat complete. So now I've got one coat, two coats here, and three coats. And you can it's night and day the difference in the opacity levels. When the video jumps back in, there'll be three coats covered and it'll be fully opaque. That's our Celestial Grey base coat complete. Next colour we're going to need is Ultron Grey. This one's a layer paint. As we discussed about layer paints, they are translucent, transparent. Not sure which is the correct scientific term. We're just going to take a blob of that. Still quite a gloopy paint. Little groups of pigment in there. Little bit of thinning down, not as much as we would have done with the base coat. Use the thumbnail trick just to check the flow and transparency. So I can still see through that one thin layer I've just put on my thumbnail, the Celestial Grey through it. That's perfect. Because what we're going to do is completely cover the Celestial Grey we've just done. And that might sound a bit weird that we're not leaving any of the base coat showing, but this is going to help blend everything together and make it look better, I suppose. And we're replicating cloth, not hard edges. The nice smooth transitions are best. Don't worry if this layer looks blotchy. It's not meant to look great. Don't worry too much about getting right to the edges either, like we did on the Celestra. It's actually better if you leave a darker edge. So that's our first wet layer of Ultron Grey. There's a bit of glue, bit of pooling here. We'll wick it away. Right, what I'm going to do next is take that away and dry it. That's the first layer of Ultron Grey dry. For our next layer, we're going to paint everything but the deepest recesses. Same consistency as paint before. Raised areas, get a second coat. I'm not going to paint in this recess here. I'm going to jump across to the other side. One from top to bottom, touch and go, touch and drag. Ooh. Nope, I didn't get any on the red, it's all good. So I've left one layer here, 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 a little bit here. I'm going to dry that off. For the third layer, that's the second layer dry. I'm going to apply the third layer. This layer is going to sit inside the second layer. So we're not going to completely cover what we've already just painted. It's going to go mostly there, but not quite. Almost like map contours. In fact, we can leave more recesses. So that recess wasn't there before. It is now. We're going to build up almost the idea of folds in the cloth. And again, added another one here. Nope, still not hit the red somehow. And almost that entire area. It's not very smooth looking yet. The more layers of this we do, the smoother it's going to look. Right, that's the third layer. With that dry, a fourth layer. Again, we're going to go inside what we've already painted. So these layers shouldn't take more than a minute or two to do. Let it thoroughly dry out. Use a hairdryer if you've got one. And apply another one. It seems more labour intensive than it actually is, explaining and talking it through. sounds like it will take ages to do. In reality, I've only been going for about 10 minutes. Let's try that off. And with that final layer done, we've hit max opacity with the layer paint. So no matter how much more I throw on now, it's not going to make that any more white. It's hit. Ooh. That is pretty much the color it's ever going to be. So we'll shift it up a gear and go to titanium white. 1 drop should do. 2. I don't normally recommend thinning inks, but we're basically doing a glaze now, so it is required. Super thin down, very low viscosity. Let's do the thumbnail check. I can see all the layers underneath for that. But much like we did with the all-for-one grey, I'm going to put one thin glaze, one thin coat over the whole lot. I'm not going to need to go back to the reservoir on my palette to get any more paint out. I'm going to take what I've got and I'm going to spread it thin. All over, all the areas that should be white, even the shaded areas we've created. And I'm going to take any excess out of my brush. I'm going to go back and go check my miniature and get out any of the pools of white, because those where the pools form will be where we need it to be darkest. Here we go. Don't want that. And in here. So even though it's been wicked away, there is still a very thin layer there. Perfect. Okay. And thoroughly dry it. Second layer of white paint. White ink. So we're going to try and do it again, like we did with the old fob. We're not doing any hard edges. We're just going to put a layer on the most exposed areas. Now with inks, we're more making sure it's pushed into the right place, because it will want to go everywhere. Be careful with how much you have on the brush at any given time. That's a good second layer. Third layer of white ink. Ooh. Always on the lookout for rogue hairs in your paintbrush. Right, third layer. Yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not trying to create any hard lines. Just building up that volume of paint. Make it look nice and soft, like a cloth should look. I'm not pushing hard on the brush now, I'm just using the tip. Keep checking that red. I still don't know how I haven't hit it. There we go. And with that, the white cape is done. Yeah, this is entirely optional. You don't have to do this, guys. What I would say though is this is the ideal opportunity to test on a piece when no one's going to see your work. And that way, if you get these practice pieces in, then when you go off on something you really want to show off and you really want to make look as good as you possibly can, this practice is going to be invaluable. At this stage, we're ready to start doing a little bit of freehand, which will be the next video. Completely optional, much more advanced technique. It's more fine art than what we're doing here, which is we're painting what's actually on the miniature rather than adding to it, adding our own designs. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was useful, and I'll see you on the next video.